Well, I sort of had a change of heart 5 years ago. So actually 6 years ago, 2014. So I sort of hung up my bike, which at that point I'd switched from swimming to cycling as sort of my main sport. Um, but at that point, a couple of things had happened. So one, I had become very familiar with a lot of emerging research on excessive cardiovascular training, which again is a rich man's problem.
Ultra marathons, ultra biking, ultra swimming, hiking.
That's right. That's right. So again, and it's the same sort of curve, right? Where as dose of exercise goes up, mortality comes down, but it has this little bit of a J where once you start to get into hyper amounts of exercise, especially over the age of 40, you're actually driving an increase in mortality. Now, again,
Really?
yes, you
Does
don't
that
want
mean
to.
like running a marathon once a year, or is it running a marathon every week
Yeah,
type?
great point. Running a marathon once a year, probably not increasing your mortality at all. But, running 40, 50 miles a week probably is,
Wow, really?
especially at that age. Now, again, this gets to your point about resilience. Someone in their 20s doing that doesn't seem to have any impact on mortality. It really only seems to be an issue if you continue. In fact, I did an interview with a cardiologist, James O'Keefe, on my podcast, who is, the world's expert on this. And it was actually James's work 6 years ago, because I heard him speak at a conference 10 years ago. We became friends. It's one of those things, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you hear something and you don't want it to be true. So you basically come up with all the reasons you're going to poke holes in it until you can't anymore.
You find the evidence the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. And eventually it became very difficult to ignore that this
Mm.
hyper amount of exercise was counterproductive. So that's one piece of the change 6 years ago. The second piece,
It's probably bad that I just committed to doing the marathon next year yesterday.
that's all right though. You'll be fine. I just think don't do
Yeah,
one a
yeah,
month,
yeah, exactly.
and then I think the second thing was I realized, like, it was sort of funny, but I realized like my prime was so far behind me that I needed to think about like what was I doing this in service of, right? Like,
Mhm.
and not that I needed anyone other than myself to do these things, because I'm very self motivated.
Mhm.
So I don't like. But just as a joke, one day I asked my wife. I said, "Hey, do you know what my PR is for 20K?" Like,
Bike, run, or swim?
yeah, bike on a 20K bike on the time trial, and I was like, this is my wife. She hears me talk about this stuff all the time. I have spreadsheets and models and data, and I analyze my power data every single day. And I'm trying to break the record for San Diego. Like, I'm really so switched on to this. She'll probably get it within a minute. She'll guess what my PR is within a minute. She was off by 20 minutes, meaning she wasn't even in the zip code. So I was like, that's funny. Like, it's like literally the most important person in my life couldn't care less about this. And what I realized was, I need to start thinking about a different sport, which is the sport of longevity. So, what
Mm.
does it mean to be a kick ass 100-year-old? And so that was the beginning of a mental model for me that in the past 2 years has gained much more traction, called the Centenarian Olympics.
Huh.
So, how do you train to kick ass at 100 should you get there? And of course, everywhere along the way. So that
That's
now dominates my landscape of training, which means I don't, care about how fast I can, ride a 40-kilometer time trial, because that doesn't quite fit into what a centenarian needs to be able to do.
what is your mindset going into a 40-mile bike then, or some type of experience? Is it more the joy of it, to just
So,
have
so I don't, I
fun?
don't, I don't, I don't train. No, my training is very specific, but now it is fundamentally organized around four pillars. So the pillars being stability, strength, mitochondrial or aerobic efficiency, and anaerobic performance. And so each of those then has a super layered detail approach. And I still ride my bike 4 hours a week. So it's a fraction of what I used to do. And it's now very much geared to a certain energy system and a type of training. Um,
What was the
so
fourth
by
one? Stability, strength, mitochondria, and
mitochondrial efficiency or aerobic efficiency. And then the fourth and final one is anaerobic performance.
so you focus on those four metrics now on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Those four pillars sort of make up the training program, which is
Interesting.
then in service of something that I invite every patient to define for themselves, which is, because you will have a different, set of variables from me potentially. But, my Centenarian Olympics has, 18 events in it. Like I want to be able to pull myself out of a pool that, where there's a 1 foot gap between the water and the curb, like lift myself up. I want to be able to hop over a 3 foot fence. I want to be able to walk 3 miles in an hour. I want to be able to carry 2 10-pound bags up 4 flights of stairs. I want to be able to goblet squat 30 pounds because that's about the weight of a kid. I want to be able to get up off the floor without using my hands. So I could rattle off all of my 18 things and you would say, Peter, those seem really easy. And you'd be right as a 37-year-old stud. But the point is,
as a 60-year-old, a lot of them aren't easy.
Most 60-year-olds couldn't do this if their life depended on it. And I have yet to meet but maybe one person in their 80s or 90s who can. And so that's the aspiration, is to get to that level in your 80s or 90s. How do you work that backwards to inform your training in your 60s, in your 50s, and in your 40s? And it's actually very hard.
And as I'm getting into, I'm 3 years away from 40, what should someone in my age range be thinking about when they're, I'm healthy, I feel good, maybe have some aches and pains here and there when I'm training hard or something, but for the most part, I feel amazing. What should I be thinking about moving forward so that I continue to feel amazing and have the ability to do these things?
So I think it's never too late to at least become familiar with what these ideas mean. And it doesn't mean that you have to go whole hog and devote yourself to this. Like I've obviously made a very conscious choice that I don't go to swim meets. I don't go to bike races. Like I don't train for those things anymore. And a big part of that is just time. There are only 168 hours in a week. And, I have a very clear set of priorities, and I'm willing to set aside 10 to 12 hours a week for exercise, which by many people's standards is still quite a lot, but probably by the standards that you exercise, and certainly by the standards that I used to exercise, I've never exercised so little in my life. So I have to be very efficient with every one of those minutes. And that means I'm laser focused on the 4 principles of that. In your case, I think it comes down to saying, okay, how much time do you want to devote to the long game? How much time do you want to devote to the short game? Another way to think about this would be investing. If you're looking at an investment portfolio, you might say, how much do I want to put both time and money, so the actual capital I set aside, but also the amount of time I spend deliberating over it, into my retirement account, versus how much do I want to invest as a day trader for short-term gains, for money that I'm going to be using in the near term that's maybe even supplementing my income today. Mm-hmm. You could have totally different strategies for that, and that's totally fine. So I'm just in the category where I'm only thinking about long-term permanent capital. Right. And so that's the first question, is you have to decide, how do you want to do that? And it might be that you say, Peter, at 37, I just want to focus on running a marathon. I've always wanted to do an Ironman, so I'm going to go and do that. And, I want to climb Mount Everest, and that's going to require, you might have a whole bunch of these bucket list things. And truthfully, right, I would say do them now, because it's only going to get harder.
Because you're not going to be able to do it later. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're going to want to do it later. So get those things out of the way. Yeah. And then maybe when you turn 40, you say, okay, now it's time I'm going to really focus on my Centenarian Olympics, when I have a better sense of what those events look like for me personally.
That's interesting. Is there a list somewhere of your 18 on your website that I can link up for people to check this out?
No, it's not. We have I think I have a subset of them for our patients in our, documents that talk through this stuff, but it'll be in my book.